A split-second decision in the harsh fluorescent glare of a grocery store aisle changed two men's lives forever. The black barrel of a standard-issue Glock 19, held in the trembling, sweaty grip of a local patrolman, pointed directly at the chest of an off-duty federal agent holding a carton of almond milk. It was a scene born of profiling, paranoia, and unchecked ego, a powder keg waiting for a single spark. But what the arrogant officer didn't know was that his badge wouldn't protect him today. He was about to be stripped of his power, publicly humiliated, and fired on the spot by his own commanding officer. And the brutal, devastating karma that followed would dismantle his entire world, piece by piece. The automatic doors of the fresh fare supermarket slid open with a gentle whoosh, letting in the crisp autumn air. Lamar Caldwell stepped inside, shaking the light drizzle from his dark wool coat. He carried himself with a quiet, unassuming confidence. He was a man who noticed everything: the placement of the security cameras, the exits, the nervous teenagers struggling to bag groceries at Register 3. It was an occupational hazard. As a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically working out of the Violent Crimes Task Force, switching off wasn't entirely possible. But today was Sunday, his rare day off, and his mission was simple: gather the ingredients for his daughter's favorite Sunday dinner. Lamar navigated a shopping cart with a squeaky front left wheel toward the produce section. He selected 3 ripe avocados, a bundle of cilantro, and a bag of limes. He wore an unbranded gray hoodie underneath his open coat, comfortable dark denim, and a pair of worn-in boots. Tucked neatly into an inside breast pocket was his leather credentials wallet, housing his gold shield. Holstered at his right hip, concealed entirely by the drape of his coat and hoodie, was his service weapon. 3 aisles over, a woman named Nancy watched him. She clutched her purse tightly against her chest, her eyes narrowed. Lamar had done absolutely nothing wrong. He was currently debating between organic and regular bell peppers. Yet to Nancy, a tall, athletic black man wearing a hoodie in the upscale neighborhood of Westbridge was cause for alarm. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the keypad, and dialed non-emergency dispatch. "Yes, I'm at the Fresh Fare on Oakville Road," Nancy whispered into the phone, hiding behind a display of baked beans. "There's a suspicious man here. He's walking around looking at people. He looks like he's hiding something under his coat. I think he might have a weapon." The dispatcher dutifully took down the description, coding the call as a potential suspicious person with a possible concealed weapon. It was a low-priority call, but the mention of a weapon triggered a standard patrol response. Cruising just 2 blocks away in his black-and-white cruiser was Officer Vance Hargrove. Vance was a veteran of the Westbridge Police Department, a man whose disciplinary file was thick with excessive force complaints that had miraculously never stuck. Vance viewed himself as a sheepdog, the thin blue line protecting the innocent from the wolves. In reality, he was a hothead with a badge, a man who escalated situations to satisfy his own desperate need for authority. When the call came over the radio, Vance's pulse quickened. "Suspicious male, possible weapon." He hit his lights but left the siren off, wanting the element of surprise. He swerved into the supermarket parking lot, tires squealing against the wet asphalt, and parked diagonally across 2 handicapped spaces near the entrance. Inside, Lamar had moved on to aisle 4, the cereal and breakfast foods. He was scanning the shelves for the specific brand of honey granola his wife requested. The heavy thud of tactical boots hitting the linoleum floor echoed through the store. Vance Hargrove marched through the automatic doors, his hand already resting instinctively on the butt of his holstered Glock. He bypassed the registers, his eyes scanning the aisles until he spotted the gray hoodie in aisle 4. Lamar heard the boots before he saw the officer. His training kicked in, registering the aggressive, rapid cadence of the footsteps. He didn't turn immediately, not wanting to provoke whatever situation was unfolding behind him. "Hey, you." Turn around slowly. The voice barked out, loud enough to shatter the low hum of the supermarket refrigerators. Shoppers in the adjacent aisles froze. A mother pulled her toddler behind a display of paper towels. Lamar slowly turned around. He kept his hands visible, resting them lightly on the handle of his shopping cart. He took in the sight of Officer Vance Hargrove. The officer's face was flushed, his jaw tight, his stance wide and aggressive. "Can I help you, officer?" Lamar asked, his voice calm, pitched low to de-escalate. He had dealt with panicked rookies and aggressive beat cops before. The key was to remain unthreatening. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Vance shouted, closing the distance until he was only feet away. "We got a call about a suspicious individual matching your description. You carrying a weapon on you?" Lamar knew exactly how this was playing out. He knew the statistics, and he knew the reality of being a black man in America facing down a nervous cop. He also knew he was legally armed and federally authorized to be so. "Officer, my name is Lamar Caldwell. I am off duty," Lamar said, emphasizing the last two words carefully. "I am going to tell you exactly what I have on me, and then we are going to clear this up. I asked you a question. Are you armed?" Vance's hand unclipped the retention strap on his holster. "I am a federal agent," Lamar stated clearly, locking eyes with Vance. "I have my service weapon holstered on my right hip, and my credentials are in my inside left coat pocket." The words should have ended the encounter. They should have prompted Vance to ask for the credentials, verify them, and apologize for the misunderstanding. But Vance's adrenaline was spiking. He was suffering from auditory exclusion, a psychological phenomenon where high stress causes a person to tune out crucial information. All Vance processed was, "He has a weapon. Do not move." Vance screamed, drawing his weapon. The metallic scrape of the gun leaving the holster seemed deafening. He leveled the barrel directly at Lamar's chest. "Get your hands in the air. Do it now." The air in aisle 4 evaporated. The ambient store music, a soft acoustic cover of an 80s pop song, felt surreal and mocking against the life or death tension. Lamar Caldwell slowly raised his hands, keeping his palms open and facing forward. He didn't flinch. His heart rate elevated, but his breathing remained controlled. He analyzed Vance's posture, shoulders hunched, arms rigidly extended, trigger finger resting dangerously close to the trigger guard. The officer was terrified, which made him unpredictable and incredibly dangerous. "My hands are up," Lamar said, his voice carrying an unnatural stillness. "Officer, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are pointing a firearm at a senior special agent of the FBI. My badge and ID are in my left breast pocket. I can retrieve them for you slowly, or you can call your watch commander." "Shut your mouth," Vance yelled, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "Turn around and get on your knees. Cross your ankles." "I am not getting on my knees," Lamar replied firmly. The moment he surrendered physical control to an erratic, panicking officer, his risk of being shot accidentally or intentionally skyrocketed. "I am an agent of the federal government. I am not a threat to you. Call for a supervisor." "I am giving you a lawful order," Vance screamed, taking a half step forward. The muzzle of the gun wavered slightly. "Get on the ground or I will shoot you." At the front of the store, the automatic doors slid open again. Officer Garrett Klein rushed in. Klein was older, a seasoned veteran nearing a quiet pension. He had heard the tension in Vance's radio traffic when he arrived on the scene and had immediately rolled his backup. Klein hated working with Vance. He thought the younger cop was a liability, a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. Klein rounded the corner of aisle 4 and froze. "Hargrove, talk to me," Klein called out, keeping his own weapon holstered but resting his hand on it. He assessed the scene. A well-dressed man with his hands up, a shopping cart full of groceries, and Vance Hargrove aiming a loaded weapon at him like they were in a war zone. "He's armed, Klein. He's got a gun on his right hip," Vance yelled without looking back. Klein looked at Lamar. Lamar briefly shifted his gaze to the older officer. "Officer Klein," Lamar said, reading the nameplate from a distance. "My name is Agent Lamar Caldwell, FBI. I have my credentials in my left pocket. Your partner is overreacting to a suspicious person call." Klein felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked at Lamar's calm demeanor, the expensive wool coat, the groceries. He looked at Vance's trembling hands. Klein knew instantly that the man with his hands up was telling the truth. You don't fake that kind of ice water in the veins composure while staring down the barrel of a Glock. "Hargrove, lower your weapon," Klein said, taking a cautious step forward. "Are you crazy? He's armed," Vance barked. "He says he's a federal agent." "Hargrove, stand down. Let's look at his ID." "It's a trick. He reaches into his coat. He could pull a gun." Vance's ego was engaged now. Backing down meant admitting he was wrong, admitting he had panicked. In Vance's warped world view, police never back down. "Officer Hargrove," Lamar said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "If you pull that trigger, you will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary. I am going to slowly lower my left hand. I am going to use 2 fingers to pull my badge from my coat pocket. I am doing this now." "Don't do it. I'm warning you," Vance screamed. "Hargrove, lower the damn gun," Klein yelled, unholstering his own weapon and keeping it pointed safely at the floor in the low-ready position. The dynamic had shifted. Klein was now preparing to intervene against his own colleague. Lamar moved with agonizing slowness. His left hand descended from the air, hovering near the lapel of his coat. Vance's fingers slipped into the trigger guard. Klein took a sharp breath, preparing to tackle Vance. With 2 fingers, Lamar pinched the leather of his credentials wallet and slowly drew it outward. He flipped it open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the supermarket caught the brilliant gold of the FBI shield. The bold blue lettering of his identification card was unmistakable even from feet away. Klein let out a massive breath of relief and immediately holstered his weapon. "All right, he's clear. Vance, holster your weapon, now." Vance stared at the gold shield. His brain struggled to process the reality of his monumental mistake. Instead of relief, a flush of deep, humiliating anger washed over him. He had been made to look like a fool in front of a crowded supermarket and his fellow officer. "How do I know that's real?" Vance snarled, keeping his gun raised. "Anybody can buy a fake badge online." Klein was appalled. "Hargrove, are you out of your mind? Holster the weapon. That is a direct order from a senior officer." "He's a suspect." Vance doubled down, his voice cracking with stubborn rage. "Throw the badge on the ground and get on your knees." Lamar's eyes hardened. The time for de-escalation was over. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a rogue officer committing aggravated assault under the color of law. "Officer Klein," Lamar said, his eyes never leaving Vance, "I strongly suggest you secure your partner. Because if I have to defend myself, I will not hesitate." Klein reached for his radio. He bypassed dispatch entirely. He keyed his mic to a private tactical channel reserved for command staff. He knew exactly who was eating lunch at the diner across the street. "Chief Russo," Klein spoke urgently into the mic. "This is Klein. I need you at the Fresh Fare on Oakville immediately. Code 3. Officer Hargrove is holding a verified FBI agent at gunpoint and is refusing to stand down." Chief Dominic Russo had been enjoying a rare quiet moment over a turkey club sandwich when his radio crackled to life. Russo was a longtime veteran of law enforcement, a man built like a fire hydrant with a closely cropped buzz cut and eyes that missed nothing. He had spent the last several years trying to clean up the Westbridge Police Department, weeding out the cowboys and the liabilities. He knew Vance Hargrove was a problem. He had been building a file to terminate him, waiting for the right infraction to make it bulletproof against the police union's inevitable appeals. When he heard Klein's transmission, Russo dropped his half-eaten sandwich, threw a $20 bill on the table, and sprinted for his unmarked SUV. The diner was literally across the plaza. It took him seconds to reach the supermarket doors. Russo didn't walk into the store. He stormed in, an unstoppable force of nature. Shoppers parted for him like the Red Sea. He heard the shouting from aisle 4 and rounded the corner just as Vance took another aggressive step toward Lamar. "Hargrove, freeze." Russo's voice thundered through the aisles, carrying the concussive force of an explosion. Vance flinched, finally looking away from Lamar. When he saw Chief Russo marching down the aisle, the color completely drained from his face. The aggressive, domineering posture melted away, replaced by the posture of a terrified child caught in a lie. "Chief," Vance stammered. "Do not speak to me." Russo growled, closing the distance in 3 massive strides. He stepped directly between Vance's gun and Lamar, acting as a human shield. It was an ultimate display of trust in the federal agent and absolute contempt for his own patrolman. "Holster that weapon, now," Russo ordered, his voice dangerously low. Vance's hands were shaking so badly, he struggled to get the Glock back into the holster. He fumbled with the retention strap, finally clicking it into place. Russo turned to Lamar. He saw the open credentials wallet in Lamar's hand. Russo knew a real federal shield when he saw one. He recognized the specific watermarks and the font used by the Bureau. "Agent Caldwell," Russo said, his tone shifting instantly to professional respect. "I'm Chief Dominic Russo. I deeply apologize for this situation." "Chief." Lamar nodded slightly, lowering his arms but keeping the badge out. "Your officer ignored my verbal identification, ignored the visual presentation of my credentials, and ignored the direct orders of his senior backup officer to stand down. He stated he believed my badge was fake and threatened to shoot me if I didn't get on the ground." Russo's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered. He turned slowly back to Vance. "Chief, listen. We got a call about a suspicious guy with a gun," Vance pleaded, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by desperate backpedaling. "He had his hands hidden. I was just following protocol for an armed suspect." "Protocol?" Russo interrupted, stepping so close to Vance that the younger officer had to lean back. "Protocol is identifying yourself. Protocol is assessing the threat. Officer Klein assessed the threat in seconds. You held a gun on a federal agent who was holding his badge in plain sight. You ignored commands to stand down. You let your ego override your training, your common sense, and the law. So you did. He could have been lying." Vance whined, sounding pathetic. He presented a federal badge. "Hargrove, you don't have the authority to play judge and jury in a grocery store aisle because your pride got hurt." Russo's voice echoed off the linoleum, a harsh, unforgiving sound. Shoppers were now filming on their phones, peeking around the ends of the aisles. Klein stood silently, watching his boss systematically dismantle the rogue officer. "You are a liability to this department, to this city, and to the badge you wear." Russo continued, his voice cold as ice. He didn't care who was filming. He wanted this on the record. "I have reviewed your use of force files, Hargrove. I've watched your body cam footage. You escalate. You provoke. You hide behind that uniform to bully people." "Chief, you can't talk to me like this," Vance said, trying to summon a shred of defiance. "I'll talk to my union rep." "You do that," Russo said, stepping back and pointing a thick finger at Vance's chest. but you won't be doing it as an employee of my department. Officer Vance Hargrove, you are hereby stripped of your police powers effective immediately." Vance's eyes widened in sheer panic. "What? You can't fire me on the spot. There's a process. There's an investigation." "The investigation just concluded, and I was the lead detective," Russo stated flatly. "You committed aggravated assault under the color of law against a federal officer. I am not suspending you pending an inquiry. I am terminating you, right here, right now. Hand me your weapon and your radio." "Chief, please," Vance begged. The realization crashing down on him. His career, his identity, his power, it was all evaporating in the cereal aisle of a supermarket. "Your weapon and your radio. Give them to Officer Klein," Russo demanded. With trembling hands, a thoroughly broken Vance Hargrove unbuckled his heavy-duty belt. The clatter of the equipment being handed over to Klein sounded like a death knell. Next came the badge. Vance unpinned it from his chest, his fingers clumsy, and handed the piece of metal over. "Officer Klein," Russo commanded, "escort Mr. Hargrove out of this store. He is trespassing. He will find his own way home. If he attempts to access his patrol vehicle, arrest him for grand theft auto." Klein nodded grimly. "Let's go, Vance." Vance looked around. Dozens of civilians were watching him. Phones were recording. The sheer humiliation of the moment was suffocating. He had walked in feeling like a god demanding compliance at the barrel of a gun. Now he was being marched out, stripped of his weapons and his dignity, nothing more than an unemployed civilian who had just ruined his own life. As Vance was led away, head bowed, Russo turned back to Lamar. "Agent Caldwell, I know an apology doesn't fix this," Russo said quietly. "If you intend to press federal civil rights charges against him, you will have my full cooperation and the complete transparency of this department." Lamar slid his badge back into his coat pocket. He looked at the spot where Vance had been standing, then back at the chief. "I appreciate that, Chief Russo," Lamar said, his voice calm but with an underlying edge of steel. "I don't just intend to press charges. I am going to make sure that man never wears a uniform or carries a gun in this country ever again." Lamar turned his attention back to his shopping cart. He looked at the cereal boxes. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I still have to finish grocery shopping for my family." The walk from the sliding glass doors of the Fresh Fare supermarket to the edge of the parking lot felt like a forced march through a gauntlet. Vance Hargrove, stripped of his gun, his radio, and the metal shield that had defined his entire adult identity, kept his eyes glued to the wet asphalt. He could feel the stares. He could hear the low murmur of shoppers, the harsh whispers, and the unmistakable click of smartphone cameras capturing his absolute disgrace. He didn't have his patrol car. Chief Russo had made good on his threat. Vance had to call a rideshare, standing in the cold drizzle for agonizing minutes, wearing a police uniform missing its badge, while a teenager in a beat-up Honda Civic eventually pulled up to drive him home. The moment Vance walked through the front door of his suburban split-level home, he grabbed his personal cell phone and dialed Curtis Hammond. Curtis was the senior representative for the local police union, a man known for aggressively defending cops, no matter how egregious the complaint. Vance expected Curtis to be outraged, to immediately draft a fiery press release condemning Chief Russo's lack of due process. "Curtis, it's Hargrove." Vance barked into the phone, pacing his living room. "Russo just stripped me in public. He took my weapon. He fired me on the spot over a misunderstanding with some guy at the grocery store. I need a lawyer, and I need the union to file a grievance immediately." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. When Curtis finally spoke, his voice lacked the usual bluster. It was cold and terrifyingly clinical. "Vance, I've already seen the video," Curtis said flatly. "What video?" "It just happened." "It's already on Twitter, Vance. 2 different angles from shoppers, plus the security feed from the store that someone leaked to the local news." "The guy you drew down on? Lamar Caldwell?" He isn't just an FBI agent. He's a senior special agent with the Violent Crimes Task Force. He has friends at the Department of Justice who are currently ripping the roof off the mayor's office. He had a concealed weapon, Curtis. I was following protocol, Vance shouted, desperation bleeding into his anger. Protocol? Curtis sighed, a sound heavy with exhaustion. You ignored a verified gold shield. You ignored Officer Klein's direct orders to stand down. You pointed a loaded firearm at a federal agent in a crowded supermarket. The Union is not going to touch this, Vance. Vance froze. The room suddenly felt incredibly small. What do you mean you aren't going to touch this? I pay my dues. You have to represent me. We represent officers who make mistakes in the line of duty. Curtis corrected him sharply. We don't represent rogue elements who commit aggravated assault under the color of law against federal personnel. Chief Russo has already forwarded your file to the district attorney, and the FBI is opening a federal civil rights investigation. You are toxic waste, Vance. If we back you, we lose all our leverage for the next contract negotiations. You are on your own. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. By that evening, the story was the lead on every local news network, and it was rapidly climbing the national cycle. The headline across the bottom of the screen was damning. Rogue cop fired on the spot after holding off-duty FBI agent at gunpoint. Chief Dominic Russo held a press conference on the steps of the precinct. He didn't offer the usual political doublespeak. He didn't ask for patience while an investigation unfolded. Russo stepped up to the podium, looking furious and resolute. Earlier today, an officer under my command violated the core tenets of our department, the law, and basic human decency. Russo boomed into the cluster of microphones. He profiled a shopper, escalated a non-violent situation, and drew a weapon on a verified off-duty senior special agent of the FBI. Let me be unequivocally clear. The actions of Vance Hargrove do not represent the Westbridge Police Department. He was terminated immediately at the scene. His badge has been destroyed. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities to ensure he faces the maximum legal consequences for his actions. Vance watched the broadcast from his couch, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey, feeling the walls of his life closing in. He expected his phone to ring with supportive texts from his squad mates, the guys he drank with, the guys he swapped war stories with. The blue wall of silence was supposed to protect him, but his phone remained completely, agonizingly silent. The real nightmare began the following day. A sleek black town car pulled into Vance's driveway. Two men in sharp suits stepped out. They weren't local detectives. They were internal affairs investigators from the Department of Justice, accompanied by a ruthless assistant United States attorney named Elias Wyatt. Wyatt had a reputation for hunting dirty cops with terrifying precision. They handed Vance a thick manila envelope. It was a federal indictment. He was being charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony carrying a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. You should get a lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, Prosecutor Wyatt said smoothly, adjusting his tie. Though given the video evidence and the sworn testimony of your former partner, Officer Klein, I'd suggest you find one who specializes in plea deals. Klein. The betrayal hit Vance like a physical blow. Officer Garrett Klein, a man he had ridden with, had already flipped and testified against him before a grand jury. The brotherhood he had based his entire ego upon had evaporated, leaving him entirely exposed to the crushing weight of the federal justice system. The swiftness of Vance's downfall was breathtaking, but the ensuing karma was meticulous and brutal. The universe, it seemed, was not done collecting its debts. Without the Union to pay for his legal defense, Vance was forced to hire a private criminal defense attorney. The retainer alone wiped out his modest savings. Within weeks, he had to list his house for sale. The real estate market was cool, and to liquidate fast enough to pay his mounting legal bills, he had to sell it at a devastating loss. Then came the collapse of his personal life. Vance had been engaged to a woman named Vanessa, a pediatric nurse who had always turned a blind eye to Vance's aggressive tendencies, believing his stories that he was just keeping the streets safe. But the video from the Fresh Fare supermarket broke that illusion entirely. Vanessa watched her fiancé scream at a calm, rational man, threatening his life over sheer ego. She saw the monster that the badge had allowed him to hide. Weeks after the incident, while Vance was meeting with his overpriced lawyer, Vanessa packed all her belongings, left her engagement ring on the kitchen counter, and moved to another state without leaving a forwarding address. Vance was now broke, alone, and facing a federal trial, but he still clung to a toxic, delusional shred of pride. He convinced himself that he was a victim of a political witch hunt, that Lamar Caldwell had baited him, and that a jury would surely see that he was just a cop trying to be careful. He was wrong. The trial began months later in a federal courthouse downtown. The prosecution's case, led by Elias Wyatt, was a masterclass in legal dismantling. Wyatt didn't just show the video. He broke it down frame by frame. He highlighted Lamar Caldwell's de-escalation tactics versus Vance's unhinged aggression. When Agent Lamar Caldwell took the stand, the courtroom fell dead silent. Lamar wore a tailored Navy suit, looking every bit the seasoned federal investigator. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with cold, clinical facts. "I informed the defendant that I was an armed federal agent," Lamar testified, looking directly at the jury. "I slowly produced my credentials. The defendant looked at my badge, stated he believed it was fake, and threatened to shoot me if I did not kneel. At that moment, I realized I was not dealing with a rational law enforcement officer. I was dealing with an active threat to my life." Vance's defense attorney tried to cross-examine Lamar, attempting to suggest that Lamar's hoodie made him look suspicious. Lamar shut it down effortlessly. "Counselor, I was buying avocados and granola on a Sunday afternoon," Lamar replied smoothly. "If wearing a sweatshirt while buying groceries is the legal threshold for having a firearm pointed at your chest, then every citizen in this country is in grave danger from men like your client." But the true twist of hard karma arrived during the trial. Prosecutor Elias Wyatt had dug deep into Vance's past during discovery. Without the police union running interference, Wyatt had gained access to Vance's unredacted personnel files. He found a pattern of excessive force complaints that had been quietly swept under the rug by a previous corrupt watch commander. Wyatt found a specific case from years prior. A college student named Malcolm Henderson had been pulled over by Vance for a broken tail light. The encounter had ended with Malcolm suffering a broken orbital bone and Vance charging him with resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Malcolm had lost his college scholarship and spent months in county jail before the charges were mysteriously dropped due to lack of evidence. The federal trial regarding Agent Caldwell suddenly became the catalyst that shattered the dam protecting Vance's past. Seeing Vance exposed and vulnerable on the national news, Malcolm Henderson came forward. He contacted a high-profile, notoriously aggressive civil rights attorney named Stephen Abernathy. Right as Vance's defense attorney was resting his incredibly weak case, Stephen Abernathy held a press conference on the courthouse steps. For years, Vance Hargrove used a police badge as a license to terrorize the citizens he swore to protect, Abernathy announced, flanked by a nervous but resolute Malcolm Henderson. The attack on Agent Caldwell was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a career built on brutality. Today we are filing a multi-million-dollar civil rights lawsuit against Mr. Hargrove personally, as he was acting outside the scope of his duties. The news broke Vance completely. He was sitting at the defense table when his lawyer leaned over and whispered the news about the civil suit. The color drained from Vance's face. If he somehow avoided prison, he would spend the rest of his life working minimum wage jobs just to have his wages garnished by the very people he used to bully. There was no way out. The walls hadn't just closed in. They had crushed him. That evening, a defeated, Hollowed out, Vance Hargrove instructed his attorney to accept the prosecution's plea deal. Vance pleaded guilty to the felony charge of deprivation of rights under color of law. As part of the plea agreement, Vance had to permanently surrender his peace officer standards and training post certification, meaning he could never work in law enforcement or even armed private security anywhere in the United States. He also forfeited any right to his police pension. He was completely broke, globally disgraced, and entirely stripped of the only identity that had ever made him feel powerful. The sentencing hearing of former Officer Vance Hargrove was not a media circus. It was a solemn, clinical dismantling of a man's life. The federal courtroom, paneled in dark, imposing mahogany, felt less like a hall of justice and more like a crypt. Vance sat at the defense table wearing an ill-fitting charcoal suit he had purchased off a discount rack. His previously arrogant posture was gone, replaced by the hunched, trembling frame of a man who finally understood the gravity of his actions. Presiding over the case was the Honorable Judge Maxwell Corwin, a jurist known for his piercing intellect and absolute lack of patience for law enforcement officers who abused their oaths. Judge Corwin peered over his reading glasses, scanning the pre-sentencing report with a look of profound disgust. Assistant United States Attorney Elias Wyatt stood at the podium, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Your Honor?" "The defendant did not make a mistake," Wyatt stated, his tone chillingly level. "A mistake is a misread license plate or a flawed radio transmission. What Mr. Hargrove did was a calculated act of aggression fueled by prejudice and an inflated sense of authority. He held a loaded firearm to the chest of a senior special agent of the FBI who was peacefully buying groceries. When presented with undeniable proof of the agent's identity, the defendant doubled down, threatening summary execution if his ego was not immediately serviced. A badge is a public trust, Your Honor. Mr. Hargrove weaponized that trust." Wyatt stepped aside, allowing Agent Lamar Caldwell to deliver his victim impact statement. Lamar walked to the podium with the same quiet, unshakable confidence he had displayed in aisle 4 of the fresh fare supermarket. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "When I looked down the barrel of the defendant's weapon," Lamar began, his deep voice commanding the complete attention of everyone in the gallery, "I didn't see a fellow brother in law enforcement. I saw a man who was utterly terrified of his own shadow, overcompensating with lethal force. I survived that encounter because of my specialized training in de-escalation and crisis management. But what if I had been a teenager? What if I had panicked? What if I was simply a civilian who couldn't maintain their composure while a screaming man pointed a gun at their heart? The defendant's actions that day were a tragedy waiting for a spark. He does not deserve the privilege of wearing a uniform, and he must answer for the terror he inflicted." Vance stared at his hands, his knuckles white. He waited for his attorney to offer a defense, but there was nothing left to say. The plea agreement was signed. All that remained was the judge's discretion on the exact length of the sentence. Judge Corwin leaned forward, clasping his hands together. The silence stretched for an agonizing moment before he spoke. "Mr. Hargrove, in my decades on the bench, I have presided over cases involving cartels, organized crime syndicates, and violent felons," Judge Corwin said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register. "But there is a unique, deeply corrosive evil in a police officer who uses the color of law to terrorize the innocent. You took an oath to protect the Constitution, and instead, you used it as a shield for your own bullying." The judge picked up his gavel. "You are a disgrace to the thousands of brave men and women who wear that badge with honor. It is the judgment of this court that you serve years in a federal penitentiary, followed by years of supervised release. Furthermore, as stipulated in your plea, you are permanently stripped of your post-certification. You will never hold a position of authority in this country again." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot in Vance's ears. The transition from a suburban home to the Allenwood Low Federal Correctional Institution was a psychological shattering for Vance. Even in a low-security facility, an ex-cop is a prime target. The prison administration, not wanting a high-profile murder on their hands, immediately placed Vance in the Special Housing Unit, SHU, protective custody. For years, Vance Hargrove lived in a concrete box measuring 6 by 8 feet. He was locked inside for 23 hours a day. His only interaction was with corrections officers who viewed him with sheer contempt. To them, a dirty cop was the lowest form of life, a man who made their dangerous jobs infinitely harder by destroying public trust. In the suffocating silence of his cell, Vance had nothing but time to replay the memory of the supermarket. He saw Lamar Caldwell's calm eyes. He heard Chief Dominic Russo's booming voice stripping him of his badge. He realized that his power had never been his own. It had been loaned to him by the city, and the moment he abused it, it was violently yanked away. While he rotted in isolation, the outside world continued to exact its toll. The civil lawsuit filed by Stephen Abernathy on behalf of Malcolm Henderson, the college student whose orbital bone Vance had broken years prior, progressed mercilessly. Because Vance was incarcerated and broke, he couldn't afford a defense. He was given a standard-issue bus ticket, a set of cheap civilian clothes, and gate money. He returned to a world that had entirely forgotten him, yet severely restricted his every move. He moved into a squalid, roach-infested studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city, managed by a ruthless slumlord named Roy Dalton, who charged exorbitant rent to ex-convicts because he knew they had nowhere else to go. Vance needed a job. His probation required it, and his crushing debt demanded it. But the internet never forgets. Every time he applied for a position, even entry-level office jobs or basic delivery routes, human resources departments would run a standard background check. A simple Google search of Vance Hargrove immediately yielded the viral video of him screaming at Agent Caldwell, followed by his federal mugshot and the multi-million-dollar civil judgment against him. The interviews always ended the same way, a polite but firm refusal, accompanied by a look of masked revulsion from the hiring manager. He was radioactive. Desperation finally drove him to the absolute bottom of the labor pool. He applied for a night shift janitorial and heavy freight stocking position at a massive, unforgiving regional distribution warehouse. The facility was a sprawling concrete beast where turnover was incredibly high, and the management didn't care about a man's past so long as he could lift 60-pound boxes for hours straight without complaining. The warehouse manager, a grueling taskmaster named Earl Peterson, looked at Vance's application and sneered. "I don't care that you used to be a cop, and I don't care that you went to federal prison. Here, you are a badge number on a time card. You mop the loading docks, you clear the pallet debris, and you stack the broken returns. Minimum wage, no benefits for the first year. You miss a shift, you're fired. Understood?" "Understood?" Vance mumbled, his voice hoarse, stripped of all its former arrogant brass. Life became a painful, monotonous blur. Vance worked the overnight shift, arriving and leaving in the early morning. His back ached constantly. His hands, once used to gripping a steering wheel and a service weapon, became calloused and cracked from industrial bleach and splintered wooden pallets. The hardest pill to swallow arrived with his first paycheck. Vance opened the thin envelope in the break room, exhausted and smelling of industrial cleaner. He stared at the net pay. It was criminally low. Attached to the pay stub was a legal notice from the state's garnishment division. 25% of his meager minimum wage earnings had been legally seized to pay down the multi-million-dollar civil judgment he owed to Malcolm Henderson. He was literally breaking his back to earn pennies, and a quarter of those pennies were being funneled directly to the man he had brutalized years ago. It was a Sisyphean nightmare from which he could never wake up. Later, a shift in the corporate winds brought the final, devastating blow of hard karma. Rumors circulated the warehouse that the parent company had been bought out by a rapidly expanding logistics and supply chain management firm. A VIP tour of the new executive board was scheduled. Vance was on his hands and knees on loading dock 4, using a wire brush to scrub a stubborn oil stain out of the concrete. He wore a stained gray jumpsuit, a ratty beanie pulled low over his forehead, and industrial knee pads. He looked nothing like the clean-cut patrolman of his past. He looked like a broken man. A procession of people in expensive tailored suits walked onto the loading dock, led by Earl Peterson, who was nervously pointing out the facility's efficiency metrics. "And down here, sir, are the primary outgoing freight docks," Earl said, his voice dripping with sycophantic eagerness. "We ensure a perfectly clean operational environment." Vance kept his head down, scrubbing the concrete, hoping the executives would walk past. He hated being seen in this state. The group stopped. A pair of custom Italian leather shoes stepped into Vance's line of sight, pausing just inches from the puddle of dirty, soapy water he was scrubbing. "A clean operational environment is crucial," a smooth, confident voice remarked. "Attention to detail at the ground level reflects the integrity of the entire company." Vance's scrub brush halted. The voice sent a cold, paralyzing shockwave down his spine. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice he remembered cracking with pain and fear in the back of his patrol car. Vance slowly lifted his head, his eyes traveling up the impeccably tailored navy suit, past the expensive silk tie, to the face of the CEO of the new parent company. It was Malcolm Henderson. The young man was no longer the terrified college student with a broken orbital bone. Malcolm was now successful, brilliant, and wildly accomplished. He had taken the initial settlement from the city, paid out quietly before the civil suit against Vance even began, and invested it into a disruptive logistics software startup. That startup had exploded, allowing him to buy out massive physical distribution centers across the state. Malcolm looked down at the janitor. For a brief second, there was no recognition, just a wealthy executive looking at a laborer. But then Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He took in the shape of Vance's jaw, the bridge of his nose, the distinct, defeated slump of his shoulders. Recognition dawned, slow and undeniable. The silence on the loading dock became deafening. Earl Peterson looked nervously between his new billionaire boss and the janitor on his knees. "Is there a problem, Mr. Henderson?" Earl asked tentatively. Malcolm didn't answer Earl. He kept his eyes locked firmly on Vance. Vance felt his heart hammer against his ribs, a sickening cocktail of shame, terror, and absolute humiliation rising in his throat. He waited for Malcolm to scream. He waited for Malcolm to demand his immediate termination. He waited for the final, vindictive blow. Instead, Malcolm's expression softened into something far worse than anger. It was profound, genuine pity. Malcolm crouched down, ignoring the dirty water near his expensive shoes, bringing himself closer to Vance's eye level. "Hargrove," Malcolm said quietly, so only the two of them could hear. Vance couldn't speak. He just stared, the wire brush trembling in his raw, chemical-burned hand. "I see the garnishment checks come through my foundation every month," Malcolm continued, his voice perfectly even. "I set up a scholarship fund with that money. It pays for the tuition of inner-city kids who want to study civil rights law. Your minimum wage checks bought a young woman her textbooks last semester." Vance felt a tear cut through the grime on his cheek. He had never felt so impossibly small. Malcolm stood back up, adjusting his cuffs. He turned to the nervous warehouse manager. Mr. Peterson, Malcolm said, his voice returning to its executive cadence. Yes, sir. Earl scrambled. This man here. Malcolm gestured to Vance. Make sure he keeps his hours. Don't cut his shifts. He has a very important debt to pay to society, and I want to ensure he has every opportunity to work hard and pay it off. Keep him on the heaviest rotations. Absolutely, Mr. Henderson. Consider it done. Earl nodded vigorously. Malcolm looked back down at Vance one last time. There was no smirk, no arrogant gloating. There was simply the cold, undeniable reality of a world that had righted itself. Keep scrubbing, Hargrove, Malcolm said softly. You missed a spot. Malcolm turned and walked away, his entourage of executives following closely behind. Their polished shoes clicked rhythmically against the pristine concrete. Vance Hargrove remained on his hands and knees. He didn't get up. He didn't rage against the injustice of it all, because there was no injustice left to fight. There was only the brutal, heavy, crushing weight of his own actions. He dipped his brush back into the dirty water, lowered his head, and began to scrub the floor of the man whose life he had once tried to destroy. The tragedy of Vance Hargrove was not born in a supermarket aisle, but in the quiet arrogance of a man who believed a piece of metal pinned to his chest made him unaccountable to the world. He weaponized fear, mistaking compliance for respect, and ultimately drew his weapon on the very justice system that empowered him. The universe operates on a pendulum. Those who push it with excessive cruelty will inevitably be struck down by its return. Vance lost his badge, his freedom, and his dignity, reduced to scrubbing floors to fund the very people he once oppressed. True authority is rooted in empathy and restraint, not in the barrel of a gun. When power is abused, karma does not merely punish, it entirely rewrites the narrative, ensuring the arrogant are brought to their knees to serve those they once sought to break.